What is decolonization and how does it relate to Indigenous politics? Have you ever wondered what decolonization really means and how it connects to Indigenous politics? Let's break this down in a way that makes sense. Decolonization is the process of undoing colonial domination. This means removing the structures and practices imposed by one group over another. For Indigenous peoples, this involves addressing the lasting impacts of colonization. This includes the control over their lands, resources, languages, and cultures by colonial powers. Colonization often pushed Eurocentric ways of knowing and governing as the norm. This marginalized Indigenous knowledge systems and political structures. In political anthropology, decolonization challenges the legacy of colonialism found in our social and cultural institutions. It requires us to critically examine the power relations that have historically put Indigenous peoples in a subordinate position. Indigenous politics is closely tied to decolonization. It focuses on the struggles of Indigenous peoples for self-determination, rights, and recognition. This is important both within and outside the state frameworks established during colonization. Decolonization is not just about removing colonial elements. It is also about Indigenous resurgence, which means actively reclaiming and rebuilding Indigenous identities and governance. In anthropology, decolonization means rethinking how we conduct research. It calls for moving away from extractive approaches that treat Indigenous communities as mere subjects. Instead, we should engage with Indigenous peoples as partners and knowledge holders. This involves respecting Indigenous ways of knowing and supporting their political and cultural initiatives. Practically, we can see decolonization in action through efforts like land restitution and language revitalization programs. Legal recognition of Indigenous governance is another key aspect. Education reforms that incorporate Indigenous histories and perspectives also play a role. These efforts relate to broader calls for social justice and equity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. To sum it up, decolonization is about dismantling colonial influences and restoring Indigenous autonomy. This process is central to Indigenous political movements. Anthropology contributes by examining colonial legacies and advocating for practices that respect Indigenous sovereignty and knowledge. Understanding this relationship helps us appreciate the ongoing struggles and resilience of Indigenous communities today.